Have you ever heard a story so disturbing, so buried, so deliberately erased, that even the people who survived it refused to speak its name? Tonight we're traveling into the fog-soaked Appalachian mountains, to a place locals still refuse to approach after sundown. Crow's Pass, where a widow, believed to be long dead, forced her own sons to continue a bloodline that should have ended a century before it began. And when a new heir was finally born, he vanished without a trace. What happened in that house was never meant to be uncovered. But on Forgotten Remains, we drag the forgotten into the light, even when the light fights to stay away. So sit back, lock your door, and listen closely. Because tonight's secret has been waiting over 130 years for someone brave enough to hear it. The people of Crow's Pass never spoke her real name. They simply called her the Widow, as if the word itself was enough to keep something terrible at a distance. Her house sat at the very edge of the ridge, where the wind never changed direction, and the crows circled even when the sky was clear. Travelers described it as a place where sound died, as if the valley swallowed anything that tried to escape. Some said her husband died of fever. Others whispered he never died at all, just disappeared. And the widow, with her long black dress and pale, unmoving face, raised her 3 sons in that crooked house like soldiers preparing for a war no one else could see. People in Crow's Pass avoided their family, not out of hatred, but fear, because the widow's sons had a strange look in their eyes. A quiet devotion, a blind obedience, and an unsettling belief that their family carried a burden older than the mountain itself. No one understood what that meant. No one dared to ask. But the widow always welcomed new travelers, especially young women passing through the ridge. Few stayed longer than a night. None returned. For years the valley lived with that unease, waiting for something to snap. But nothing did. Not until the widow announced, with a calmness that froze the entire town, "A new heir is coming. Our line will not die." She didn't say whose child it was. She only said the mountain had chosen. It was that night the crows began circling non-stop. A heavy storm swept over Crow's Pass, rattling windows and extinguishing lanterns. And beneath the thunder, people swore they heard something else. A cry that wasn't quite human. The widow kept her children hidden for weeks, drawing the curtains, locking the doors, chanting things that drifted into the streets like prayers meant for the dead. When the storm finally passed, a different sound came from her house. A baby's cry. Sharp. Echoing. Wrong. The widow emerged with the infant wrapped in a dark wool blanket, her sons standing silently behind her like shadows. The entire valley gathered, curious and terrified, but she didn't show the child's face. She only lifted her chin and said, "He is the beginning, and he will outlive us all." That was the last time anyone saw peace in Crow's Pass, because the very next morning, the widow's youngest son burst into the general store, shaking, bleeding, unable to speak. When he finally caught his breath, his voice trembled. "He's gone. The baby. The new heir." He vanished. The entire valley froze. The widow didn't scream. She didn't panic. She only whispered words that cut through every person in town. He didn't vanish. He was taken. She raised her eyes toward the ridge, toward the endless stretch of woods behind her home. The mountain wants him back. And that was the moment the nightmare of Crow's Pass truly began. Because the widow didn't wait for help. She didn't call for search parties. She didn't allow the sheriff to intervene. She gathered her sons, took a lantern, and marched straight into the trees before dawn, whispering to the shadows like they were old friends. By sunrise, the entire family had vanished into the woods. No tracks, no trail, no sign of a struggle. The only thing the sheriff found was the baby's empty wool blanket, hanging from a broken branch like an offering, and on it, a single, unmistakable crow feather, black as pitch, slick with dew, and warm as a human hand. The wind over Crow's Pass carried a strange sound that night, a sound Sheriff Amos Dunn could only describe later as weeping mixed with laughter. He had ridden out long after sunset, lantern hooked to his saddle, the beam swaying across the lonely ridge road. Because that morning, a boy had gone missing. Not just any boy. Jonah Brandt, the quiet, bright-eyed great-grandson of the widow at Crow's Pass. Word spread fast in a town as tiny as Fairwick, but nobody dared say out loud what they feared. That the hills had taken him. Or worse, the family had taken him back. Amos pressed on, the dirt crunching under hooves, the forest growing thicker with every step. His breath hung in the cold as he approached the one place he hoped he wouldn't have to visit again, the broken home of Abigail Crowheart, the widow whose name still curdled milk and cracked glass in local legends. The house stood with its back hunched against the cliff, the windows black, boards warped by decades of storms. The vines wrapped around the walls like veins on a corpse, a place left untouched since her death. Or so the town liked to believe. Amos dismounted and stared at the front door. He remembered exactly how it felt to stand here 13 years ago, the last time a boy had vanished. The lantern light trembled in his hand. He wasn't scared of the dark. He was scared of what lived in it. Inside, the floor groaned as if the house itself inhaled. He moved room to room, dust swirling in golden circles. The parlor still had the widow's rocking chair facing the window. The chair moved slightly, though nothing touched it. He froze. The room grew cold, unnaturally cold. His breath fogged. Then he smelled it. Lilac perfume. Old, rotten, sour. The widow's scent. It wrapped around him like a hand pressing against his throat. He stepped back, bumping into something solid. He spun around. Nothing there. But the floorboards under the far wall looked newer. Cleaner. Replaced. Someone had been here recently. Amos knelt, pressed his ear to the boards, and heard it. A single sound from beneath the floor. A heartbeat. Slow. Measured. Not human. He jerked back, lantern shaking. What in God's name? A soft thud answered him from the other side of the house. Then another. Heavy footsteps in the cellar. Amos steadied himself, drew his iron revolver, and followed the sound toward the back hall. The cellar door hung open. A faint glow flickered below, firelight. Yet the house had no fuel. No chimney draft. No reason for fire. He descended the steps. The air grew warm, too warm, suffocatingly warm, like breath from a creature with no face. At the bottom, the basement stretched into a long brick chamber he had never seen before. The widow's cellar used to be tiny, barely enough to store jars. This one was wide as a church nave, with arches of old timber and stone buried deep into the earth. He whispered to himself, somebody dug this after she died, but it didn't look newly carved. It looked ancient. In the center stood a table made from wagon parts and antlers, covered in symbols carved so sharply the wood looked wounded. Candles burned on every corner of the table, dripping down in strange patterns. But the object on the center, that stopped him cold. A cradle, hand-built, rocking by itself, empty, yet humming. A low lullaby vibrated the air, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. He felt the hair on his arms lift. Then he saw fingerprints in the dust on the floor. Tiny, frantic, dragged toward the darkest part of the cellar. Small fingerprints. Jonah's. Jonah! Amos shouted. His voice echoed unnaturally, bouncing back delayed, distorted, like someone else was saying his name behind him. He turned sharply. Nothing there. But the shadows on the walls moved where the candle flames did not. And then, from the back of the cellar, something shuffled forward on bare feet. A young man stepped into the light. Gaunt but tall. Eyes black as river stones. Hair long and matted like he'd never seen the sun. Amos raised his gun. "Show your hands," the young man smiled. Thin, crooked. "You remember me, Sheriff?" His voice scraped like splinters. Amos blinked. He couldn't be alive. He had been declared dead. The town buried an empty coffin for him. Elias Crowheart. Amos whispered. "But you died 13 years ago." Elias smiled wider. "No. I was kept. Like all the heirs. Like the boy you're looking for now." A deep, resonant thud trembled through the house, like a giant heartbeat hitting the foundation. Amos steadied his revolver. "What did you do with Jonah?" Elias tilted his head. "The pass has chosen him. Just as it chose me. Just as it chose all the sons before me. We are blood of her blood." Amos stepped closer, keeping the gun high. "You escaped once. You came to town begging for help. You were terrified. Do you remember that?" "What changed?" Elias's smile faded. The candles flickered. Then went still. Not out. Just perfectly still. Elias's eyes rolled upward, as if listening to something in the ceiling. "She's awake." A cold whisper slid across the cellar like a draft. It caressed Amos's neck, though there was no wind. The rocking cradle stopped moving. Every candle flame snapped sideways, pointing toward the cellar stairs. Something was coming down. Slow, deliberate steps, step by step by step. Elias knelt. "She returns for her blood." Amos tightened his grip on his gun, but his hands shook uncontrollably, because he finally understood. The stories about the widow's death were lies. She never left. She never slept. She was waiting under the house the whole time, and she wanted her heir back. The last step creaked. Something stood just outside the candlelight, breathing. Not alive, not dead. Amos whispered to himself, "Lord, help me," because whatever waited in the shadows had been waiting for a century. And now, it wanted him too. The cellar steps groaned again, but this time the sound came not from weight, but from age. As if something older than the wood itself pressed down, bending time along with it. Amos raised his lantern. The flame shrank, fighting to stay alive, as though the air itself didn't want light anymore. "Elias!" His voice trembled. "What's coming down those stairs?" Elias didn't answer with words. He simply bowed his head, pressing his palms to the dirt floor like a worshiper kneeling before an altar. "She comes as she always comes," he whispered. With the voice of the hills and the teeth of the earth, a shadow reached the bottom step. Long, thin, jointed wrong, not a human silhouette, not even close. Amos fired. The shot exploded like thunder in the small cellar, the bullet tearing through the darkness and hitting nothing. The shape didn't react. It didn't even slow down. A whisper drifted through the room, soft as dead leaves sliding across stone. Amos done, the sheriff staggered back. His blood froze, because the voice wasn't Abigail's. It was his mother's. The voice she used when waking him from nightmares. The voice she used the night she died. "Don't listen to it," Elias said sharply. "She'll use anyone you loved. Anyone you buried. She wants you to follow the voice. If you respond, she owns you." But the shadow on the staircase grew, too fast. Like it inhaled space. Like it swallowed the light instead of stepping into it. Amos braced himself as the shadow passed the final step and slipped soundlessly onto the cellar floor. The candles flickered backward, as if pulled toward it. The air tightened. Then something stepped forward. Not a creature, not a ghost. Something in between. The widow at Crow's Pass. But not as a woman, not anymore. Her outline shimmered like heat above a grave. Her face flickered between young and ancient, bone and skin, mother and monster. She did not walk, she glided. And behind her, dragged by a rope of woven roots, was a small figure. Jonah. Alive, but too still. Eyes open but looking through everything, like he was seeing something no one else could. Amos lunged for him. The widow moved faster than thought. Her hand, too long, fingers jointed twice, closed around Amos's wrist. Cold, soulless. His gun clattered to the floor. The widow leaned close, her mouth shifting beneath transparent skin, forming words that were not spoken but felt inside his skull. "Heir." Amos tried to pull back, but the cold traveled into his arm, numbing bone and muscle. He dropped to one knee. Elias watched in silent terror. The widow reached for Jonah, lifting him as gently as a woman lifting a newborn. Her voice deepened, echoing through the cellar beams. "My blood shall not end." Jonah blinked. Slow, hypnotized, Elias scrambled to his feet. "No. You said you needed only one. Take me instead." The widow's head rotated, too fast, too smooth, toward Elias. Her jaw unhinged slightly, cracking like a rotting door. "Used." She whispered it like a verdict. Elias collapsed, sobbing, because now Amos saw the truth. Elias wasn't alive. Not truly. He'd been kept alive far past his time, stretched thin like a candlewick burning at both ends. A placeholder heir. A temporary vessel. A puppet. And Jonah would be next. "No." Amos forced himself upright, pain searing through his arm. "You're not taking that boy." The widow turned her shifting, melted face toward him. "You cannot stop the blood." Amos reached behind him, not for his gun, but for his lantern. He smashed it against the stone pillar. Oil exploded across the floor. Fire leapt instantly toward the cradle, toward the symbols, toward the widow's shadow. Elias screamed, covering his head. The widow shrieked. A sound that wasn't sound at all, but a vibration that rattled the bones in Amos's skull. Jonah dropped limp to the ground. The widow recoiled, the firelight tearing holes through her shape. Her outline rippled, dissolving at the edges, but the fire didn't spread normally. It crawled up the walls in patterns, tracing the carved symbols like veins igniting from within. The entire chamber shuddered violently. Stones fell from the ceiling. Elias staggered to his feet. "Sheriff, if she collapses the house, we die with her. That's the idea." Amos shouted. Dust rained down. The widow pulled herself upward, tall enough now that her head brushed the beams. Her face flickered with rage, old Abigail leaking through the distortion, screaming silent curses. The cradle caught fire. The carved symbols turned orange, then white-hot. A pulse shot through the room, and the widow's body shattered into smoke, sucked upward into the collapsing ceiling. The beams snapped. The cellar ceiling buckled. Fire swallowed the room. Amos grabbed Jonah in both arms. "Move!" he yelled to Elias. They sprinted toward the stairs as the entire chamber folded inward behind them. The house groaned like a dying giant. They burst into the hallway, flames erupting from the cellar door. The house heaved, then collapsed into a storm of dust and burning wood. Outside, Amos fell to his knees in the dirt, Jonah clutched tight to his chest. Elias crawled out beside them, coughing violently. Behind them, the widow's house sank into itself like a coffin closing. For several seconds, the three of them stared in silence. Then, the ground stopped shaking, and everything went unnaturally still. Jonah stirred. His eyes fluttered. "Sheriff," he whispered weakly. Amos held him closer. "You're safe, son. You're safe. But then Elias suddenly grabbed Amos's sleeve. His face had gone pale. Listen. Amos froze, because under the dirt, under the burning rubble, something moved. Not loudly, just a faint, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat. Still alive. Still waiting. Elias's voice cracked. She isn't dead. Sheriff, she went back under the pass. Amos stared at the ground. The heartbeat pulsed again. Faster, then stopped. A cold wind rose from the rubble, swirling ash into a tight spiral. And across the wind, a whisper drifted. Blood returns. Amos grabbed Jonah's hand, pulling him away. Come on. We're leaving. Now. As they walked away from the burning wreckage, Elias stayed on his knees, staring into the rising ash, tears running down his face. Because he knew the Crowheart bloodline was broken, but not gone. The widow would rebuild. She always rebuilt, and somewhere down in the black belly of Crow's Pass, she had already chosen her next heir. If you're still here, you've heard a tale most people in Appalachia spend their whole lives avoiding. The widow at Crow's Pass was never buried in any public record. The sheriff never wrote his final report. And the towns that once surrounded her home? Gone. Swallowed by time, or something older than time. But remember this. Wherever her blood sleeps, it never sleeps for long. And the hills of Appalachia are full of stories just like this. Stories waiting for the right night, the right voice, and the right listener. If you want more forgotten horrors, more erased history, more truth carved out of old American darkness, you know where to come. This is Forgotten Remains, and some stories never stay buried.